Welcome to Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. We here at ACEC like to focus in on the work that our member firms do, the essential work, and the value that work actually provides to society and to the economy as a whole. And it's always great to put a spotlight on the firms in our industry that are doing a fantastic job of work that's both engineering and then also consultancy services on a wide range of markets and industries, and not just the things that we always talk about 90% of the time, which is infrastructure or just engineering structures or buildings. And a perfect example of that is the firm Jensen Hughes, who is widely respected since 1939 as being one of the leading firms about safety, security, risk-based engineering, especially in fire protection services. But they've grown to do so much more. And another thing about the firm is their focus on ESG, and how this all comes together is a really great topic to look at, and take a dive into. And to do that, I'm very pleased to welcome onto the program the CEO of Jensen Hughes, Raj Arora. Raj, thank you very much for coming onto the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. It's a real honor.
Raj, tell us a little bit more about the firm and how Jensen Hughes kind of approaches its work. It's a very diverse set of industry kind of sectors that it works in, and how it kind of positions itself in the marketplace.
Sure. Well, Jensen Hughes is an engineering, consulting, and technology company that makes our world safe, secure, and resilient. So, like you said, we're best known for our leadership in fire protection engineering, and that's a legacy of global leadership we've had since 1939. But we also excel in the areas that are very critical to advancing safety, security, and resiliency, including accessibility consulting, risk and hazard analysis, process safety management, forensics investigation, security and emergency management. And across all of those services, we have technology platforms that underpin all of those. And our clients really rely on us because we solve some very complex and unique problems for them and give them peace of mind that they'll be safe and secure. And as the largest professional services provider in our specific industry, we serve all markets such as government, healthcare, science and technology, energy, mission critical infrastructure, to name a few. And our mix is about 70% private sector, 15% utility, and 15% pure public sector work. And we have 1,500 colleagues approximately across the world, performing 22,000 projects annually in 100 countries. And I just wanted to say I'm very proud to be leading this company and to be associated with such amazing professionals.
It really is amazing when you look at all of the areas that you touch, both in private, public, and in the utility space. It's practically every area that is really talked about, and it's a hot market right now, from energy storage to nuclear power to climate issues related to wildfire protection. I mean, that's a big basket of areas to be involved in. And then, of course, your firm is also very engaged in the ESG side of things. I mean, from a leadership position as CEO of the firm, how do you view environment, social governance issues, and how do you kind of weave it into the work that the firm does, and what kind of sets Jensen Hughes apart from the pack when it comes to ESG?
Well, environmental, social, and governance is a very big focus for Jensen Hughes, and that obviously yields benefits for our employees, our clients, our investors. And we feel that it's our obligation to focus on making the world a better place. And in our case, safe, secure, and resilient. And let's face it, Jeff, you can't ignore these topics no matter what side of the aisle you're on, quote unquote. And for the sake of this discussion, I'm assuming the audience has a high level understanding of ESG. So I just wanted to dive into our approach. And in the traditional sense, ESG is generally aimed at what a company can do internally to help make a difference in sort of all the multi pronged ESG spaces. And we're no different in that regard. I mean, we have a heavy focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and very specifically having a culture where we value and celebrate differences, treat every individual fairly, and empower what makes them who they are. And in addition, we've reduced our carbon footprint through getting smarter about offices, travel for internal meetings, and we're also ensuring our suppliers are accredited to the ISO 14001 standard for sustainable suppliers. And on the overall governance, our policies and protocols ensure that Jensen Hughes operates reliably and effectively, and our enterprise risk management processes that we've just launched will take things to the next level. One specific area is information security, which, we all know about the cyber risks that exist. We've invested heavily and it's made a real difference for us. But all of this said, on the internal initiatives, we don't think that's enough. And the very unique part about our company is that our core offerings for our clients, help them and their investors achieve ESG goals. So it's doing well by doing good, if you will, Jeff. So in two major areas. So one is on environmental stewardship and decarbonization. We're defining best practices in issues that shape our future and our grandchildren's future. As you mentioned, like how to manage wildfire risk, engineer new energy storage systems, and safely advance carbon free infrastructure like nuclear power. And then the second is on healthy communities, societal well being, and governance. We're connecting police and communities in new ways and continuously giving back through volunteer service, pro bono work, and direct contributions to programs that uplift humanity and extend compassion to those in need. And it's really fulfilling when you know your company influences the actual change and outcomes that are needed in the world.
Without question. I mean, that is it's very interesting because it's it's an example of how engineering firms are having a direct, tangible impact on shaping the world that we want to live in for the foreseeable future. Because with all of this rapid innovation and technology, there are significant challenges that come along with those that deal with how do you deal with the tech, the powering of technology. Of course, one thing I want to talk to you about is energy storage, especially when it comes to lithium batteries, because I think that's an interesting topic. Not only the mining of the materials, of course, which is a separate issue, but when you get into the topics of storage, moving batteries, that was a big issue when I was on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee when we were talking about the batteries in the Boeing, for example, the Dreamliner. Or traveling with batteries, and then storing the batteries in such a way where there's not a risk of them igniting or exploding. And then what happens at the end of the life cycle? How looking at all those different challenges, where do you see lithium ion as kind of the standard bearer for energy storage for the long term, or do you think it's an intermittent step towards something else that will kind of take its place?
Well, let me just take a step back and I'm going to dive into that. But there's several factors at play. Obviously, the drive for renewables is the biggest
Yeah.
one. I think everyone is aware of that push. And then there's also factors like power grid peak shaving, electrical load stability, and the desire for energy independence. And for those reasons, the market is turning to these energy storage solutions. And at the heart of that is this lithium ion battery protection. And they're everywhere, Jeff, from large scale utility applications to very small scale batteries, for power packs for mobile devices. And there is new technology that's being innovated or researched and tested, but this technology is going to be deployed for the foreseeable future. And the reason why it's such an important topic in our world is that these batteries present some very unique challenges and hazards, such as overheating, off gassing, thermal runaway. And we don't have to get into all the details on the hazards, but the result of those are air contamination, fire, and explosion. And I think we've all read in the news about those types of results. And this happens due to manufacturing defect, improper design and installation, overcharging, physical damage, and like you said, how you transport these batteries. So our role in this is we help owners and insurers and integrators, manufacturers, and approving authorities kind of get educated and help them apply the standards and come up with innovative ways to be safer from start to finish. And we provide a variety of design and assessments and training in the areas of fire, explosion, electrical safety, security, and emergency response. And just the fact that we approximate that um, there's been 10 gigawatts of energy stored on projects that we've worked on, and we've provided these hazard mitigation analyses and designs for the largest energy storage sites in the US. And it seems like every day there's a new one that is claiming that they're the largest.
Yeah,
So it's a really big growth area for us. And like I said, this battery technology is here to stay.
yeah. It is something which is very interesting, and it's going to become just a bigger, I think, opportunity for your firm and firms like it. That as we expand the use of these batteries, we're going to kind of figure out how are we going to store them, how are we going to use them more effectively, and mitigate the risk that comes along with them. It's funny how I think about down my own community. We had one house go solar, and then within a month, three other houses go solar, and they also have the large, residential um, lithium ion storage, not just either through the Tesla ones that everybody knows about, or just the other kind of storage systems. And it's always a concern about how are those installed, and are they going to be good for the long term, and how are they going to stand up the test of time. So as these technologies get more accepted, um, it's going to become a greater challenge, without question. The other issue, which is, I think, kind of fits in with the issue of climate and dealing with energy generation, of course, is something that we don't talk nearly enough about. Um, is nuclear power. Where does Jensen Hughes come in on nuclear power, and how does it apply its specialties to that market?
Yeah, it's a great conversation. And in the last 18 months or so, nuclear power has been more widely recognized as essential to climate goals, which is a good thing. And it is the cleanest and safest and most reliable form of power we have, despite some of the perceptions. And the voices are getting louder across the globe. And before I talk about our role in it, I just wanted to give some facts from our friends at NEI, which is the Nuclear Energy Institute. And nuclear power generates approximately 20% of all the electricity in the United States. Um, it generates more than 50% of our carbon free electricity. And the plants operate 24/7, making it a great complement to wind and solar. Um, and US nuclear plants are more than 100 times safer than regulatory safety goals. And if Build Back Better passes in some form or fashion, I know we're not here to talk about that, but we could do a whole
A whole
podcast
episode on
on
that.
that. The landscape could really change due to the tax credit, the nuke production tax credit that is currently included in the conversations. And I don't have a crystal ball, but there doesn't seem to be pushback on any side on that particular item. And the reactor technology for nuclear is evolving, and it is the new reactor technology is advancing the adoption of new applications across size ranges. So from replacing large grid generation to off-grid localized generation, which all results in reduced costs and increased safety and performance for the market. So for us, and getting back to your question, I mean, for more than 40 years, we have pioneered what we call and what the industry calls risk informed engineering and fire protection engineering um, across the industry. And we provide all aspects of risk technology as well, from analysis of potential accident scenarios and generation risk to radiological release, both for the internal plant events and the external conditions like seismic issues or flooding. And our experts in software technology has helped us maintain a real dominant role to enhance safety and operational performance at the current fleet of reactors.
I think
Now,
it's a
just
good
a
example.
oh, I'm
I was
sorry.
no problem. I was just going to say it's a good example of how you're making a very safe form of energy generation even safer for people who think that nuclear hasn't really nothing's changed in this space. It's quite opposite. It's only gotten more um, specialized and safer over the years.
Yeah, and there's a practice and a tool called probabilistic risk assessments that we've developed and perform for more than 80% of the US industry. So we've developed their models, and it's just a really intelligent way of ensuring safety. And one specific example I wanted to give is that we've performed the analysis to support the what they call the extension of surveillance test intervals, about 700 of them. This is how a plant looks at their equipment and how it's tested, how it's maintained, how safe it is, etc. And we provide an intelligent risk assessment to saying, those pieces of equipment should be maintained at these different types of frequencies, and sometimes those deviate from some of the requirements that are in the codes and standards, and it's resulted in savings of millions of dollars for our clients. So we're helping them get a more efficient as to drive the positive economics of the nuclear industry, which then can help drive further decarbonization.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's and this is something which hopefully it's hopefully we'll be able to increase our nuclear capacity. Hopefully we'll be able to not only just expand the number of new plants, but also um, use it to greater extent to kind of offset some of our more traditional, less clean energy options, because the talk is always about coal power and how are we going to move away from coal and if we're going to go to wind, but nuclear is that tried and true um, and the system that all the work that you're doing, to make it safer, to get the testing even better, to make it an even cost savings on that model. It's a great alternative to your fossil fuels. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, and Jeff,
Uh,
it's the perfect world would be new builds.
yeah.
But I think the first step is to stop plant closures, which
Hmm.
that's out of the conversation in my mind. And then using the existing fleet that we have and the capacity we have in ways to provide more power to people as a complement to other forms of renewable type of energy. That would be the first step. And then the next step would be deploying some of these new technologies to broaden the fleet.
Yeah. Well, I do. I also want to cover kind of away from the energy side of things. Two things that are, I guess you can call them kind of combined. I guess you're looking at, of course, wildfires and the increase. It seems as though you can't go a week without hearing about a new fire, especially in California or the West Coast. Um, but then also the the increased interest in mass timber, which is something we're looking at, and we're actually going to focus in on next month at a private market symposium on residential and commercial real estate, is this a growing interest in the use of mass timber, and now that the codes are such that you can actually build larger structures with timber. But let's talk about wildfire first, because this is something which is growing in concern, not only for policymakers but for engineering firms that are dealing with risk and dealing with how do we design to mitigate or to deal with the risk of increased wildfires. Yeah, how does your firm approach this issue and its work for its public and private sector clients?
Yeah, well, to state the obvious, Jeff, growth in frequency and scale and severity of these major wildfires across the globe presents a huge risk. And we're seeing increasing levels of devastation, at the wildland urban interface, or if you want to have some street cred, you would say wooey. And
Uh-huh.
that's where the vegetation meets areas of residences and commercial buildings, and the breadth and magnitude of the short and long term impacts to physical and social and economic and environmental, even political, high value assets. It's alarming
Yeah.
and complex, and it's going to continue to increase. And in addition to the impact to the environment, the financial losses are between 8.5 to 10.5 billion per event, if you can believe that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And the reality in our space, Jeff, is that there's a strong need for fire science, engineering, and research across the whole stakeholders group, whether it's the municipalities or the forestry agencies, the utilities and insurers, and then the building owners, home and
Hmm.
building owners. And historically, there's been an overemphasis on response and not enough on the entire life cycle, right? So
Yeah.
prevention, then response and recovery. And I don't want to get into this too deeply, but there's also a confused insurance market, right? The insurers and the underwriters and the reinsurers have a slightly different lens depending on who you talk to. So, our role in this is helping change the paradigm with our experts in this area. And we're helping clients across the world assess risk and employ prevention, response, and recovery measures. And some of the specific work we do is on wildfire behavior modeling, utility hazard and fire risk, just overall vulnerability assessments, and then
Hmm.
climate, weather, and fire impact analysis, vegetation management plans, and emergency response planning. And maybe I can give you a quick example
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
that we've recently created a 2-volume community wildfire resilience white paper for FEMA. And that's to identify the current landscape of safety regulations, guidelines, and practices across the US, as well as a gap analysis that will affect or will help direct FEMA's efforts in reducing this risk. um, this has led to some very interesting outputs and efforts by the FEMA Building Science Branch to increase its role in the wildfire risk mitigation efforts and to help use engineering and science to basically employ best practices.
Hmm.
So, just a quick example there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point because as you mentioned, the focus for so much time has been on response. The view of wildfires being natural, not always regular. They don't happen. Of course, you have a wildfire season in certain areas that are prone to it, that you expect it to happen. But that thinking has shifted and needs to shift more towards the mitigation because, as you mentioned at the outset, that this is becoming a more frequent issue, a more devastating issue, not only on loss of property and potential loss of life, but also the economic impact. And moving to this mitigation first model, both on the part of the builders or the owners of property, but then also by government in their response to it. That you would, if you spend more time in mitigation, hopefully you reduce the severity of the impact at the outset, at the end of an event. But also the modeling work that you're doing is helping to kind of shape the way that communities, local governments kind of write their own codes or zoning codes and deal with preventing the next fire or reducing its impact. And that's an important thing. It's that my it's and it's important to think about this is that when I was on the committee on TNI again, excuse me, we dealt with this issue and we dealt with risk mitigation and disaster preparedness and response. And it was a sea change in people's minds about how government should respond to the threat of wildfires or the threat of severe weather. And it was always thinking about what is the federal government going to do after the storm comes? How are we going to respond to the damage? And it took a while for people to shift their minds for really how do we respond to, how do we deal with it before it happens? And that's something which our industry needs to, I think, do a better job of talking about is that we are engaged in helping to mitigate the risks of these natural events through specialized design, consultancy, and just the modeling that you do. So I think that's an important point that you raise of helping to mitigate the costs of wildfires.
Jeff, I think you have a future as a wildfire risk management consultant.
If I were only good at the technical things. I, but let's take a look at this other issue, which is I really find this interesting. Mass timber, which I talked to my colleague over in the private market space, and she talks about the growth in mass timber and the way that firms are looking at exploiting the new building codes for larger structures. And of course, you have kind of the with any material that you employ in the design of a structure, of course, that they bring along their own complexities and issues. So, how does the firm look at this market as an opportunity for growth? I mean, how are you approaching mass timber?
Well, certainly a trend with the architects, but let me just start by saying it's nothing new, but it's reemerging as there's a drive for sustainable building design and construction. And it involves the use of large solid wood panels for wall, floor, and roof construction, just to state the obvious, and has become this trend not just for sustainable agendas, but aesthetics. The architects think it looks nice and it's trendy in terms of design, but also there are cost benefits and there's speed of construction. With especially when you look at other materials and supply chain issues and the rest of it. So the building code. So when we do design and construction, and we all do it, we all follow building codes. And the 2021 international building codes and many local jurisdictions have made provisions to use mass timber. And timber was previously limited to buildings under 85 feet in height. And the code now permits new types of construction for heights up to 270 feet and 18 stories. And, one nuance is when it's protected with fire sprinklers, but that gives designers greater flexibility in construction material choices. Now, mass timber comes with some nuances. So first is fire performance. And obviously that it's perception versus the actual performance, but when you have wood, you got to make sure that, it's not a combustible construction. And mass timber exceeds the fire performance of traditional dimensional lumber by developing a predictable char layer that insulates the core and allows the members to continue bearing load well into a fire event. So the performance is better. And like I said before, is you got to, from a code perspective, ensure that although you're using a quote unquote combustible material, that you classify the building as non-combustible construction or non-combustible structure. That's kind of where we come in. And it's a little tricky because you have four approved types of this assembly, and it requires some analytical methods to ensure safety. So mass timber includes not just solid sawn members, but built up assemblies such as CLT, cross laminate timber, those panels, and then some other engineered wood products that meet the minimum dimensional criteria. So our role in it is we help our clients navigate the whole design process. We educate them on their choices, and we provide creative solutions to the changing technologies. And that's often supported with what we call a performance based analysis, which is a lot of fire modeling and performance analysis. And one particular example I'll mention is the University of Idaho's new basketball arena. It's a really great site. It's the Idaho Central Credit Union Arena, and it's all wooden, state of the art, seats 4,200 people. We provided the fire protection and life safety code consulting, which encompassed this whole performance based design with fire modeling, like I mentioned, to demonstrate the code equivalency for the fire resistance rating of the proposed construction. So we're very proud of that project
Yeah,
that we performed.
that's something. Yeah, it's interesting how it, like you said, architects are trying, kind of driving the trend for this more of a natural um, use and design, and of course, engineers are responding. But it's critically important to do all the modeling and putting the technology there, so you can actually make sure that it happens and it's safe for the long term. And I think this is a great example of again, this is wood's a good carbon sink. It's a good choice for not only aesthetics but also environmental, and it's a good example of the engineers helping their partners in the design process. You have an idea, engineers make it actually tangible and happen, and this is a good example of that. um, I want to switch gears because this is something which is very interesting and something we've talked about from our own strategic planning at ACEC, which is how engineering deals with societal equities, right? And what does that mean? You talk about engineering a city plan or helping to engineer land development in such a way where it opens up and breaks down social economic borders, or you're talking about transit systems that allow people, regardless of challenges in mobility, to get from point A to point B, and you create a built environment that is more open, accessible, and equitable to all of society. Your firm takes a more direct route, because you're engaged in law enforcement consulting. And this, of course, has become a very hot topic issue, something which is really driving much of the debate over equity in society. Um, exactly how did your firm get involved in this, and what are you doing with police departments and communities um, to bring your own special risk mitigation and expertise to this area?
Well, Jeff, I started this podcast and I said that we're an engineering, consulting, and technology company. So this is in the consulting realm of our business. And I said our purpose is to make our world safe, secure, and resilient. And this fits kind of all three, especially ticks the boxes on security. And so we came into this. Jensen Hughes is a combination of many different companies over the last 10 years. And there was an acquisition that we made. The legacy company was called Hillard Heinz, based in Chicago. And this is what really brought this expertise. And it's a real synergy in our broader safety, security, and resiliency portfolio, but it's all about healthy communities, societal well being. And there's also the G in ESG here that plays into effect. And let me start by just giving you a fact that our consulting has assisted over 25,000 sworn in law enforcement officers over the last few years. And, we have provided the after action reports and the assessments for the Louisville Police Department, which resulted from the fallout from the death of Breonna Taylor, as well as the assessment of the city of Minneapolis's response to the protests and riots that occurred after the death of George Floyd. So, some pretty marquee things. And if I take a step back, many police agencies have made great improvements in their operations over the last couple decades by focusing on the principles of community oriented policing. That's in which agencies work closely with external entities like nonprofit organizations and social service agencies to address the root causes and outcomes of social issues associated with crime. But that being said, the upheavals that have occurred in our society in the US after what happened with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd has made it apparent that there's just more that needs to be done. And specifically, professional police departments are focusing currently on incorporating a multidisciplinary approach to address some very high profile problems throughout the country, which include responding to calls for service associated with those who are unsheltered or even experience a behavioral health crisis. But you know that may not be the true role of the department, and it's becoming clear that the police department is being asked to cover a broader array of things based on budget cuts, right? So they've been called as a last resort into these situations. um, so anyway, the police departments are turning, or law enforcement agencies are turning to us for technical assistance to, as they strive to learn what their agencies can do to improve. Um, and while the new administration has been slow to kind of re-energize things, the DOJ, the U.S. Department of Justice Community Oriented Policing Program, the COPS office, is embarking on a huge opportunity to advance the effectiveness of these different police departments around the world, those who are in need. And we help offer assistance as these entities engage in consent decrees, which need to be brought into operational compliance, but also those who are proactively seeking external and third party support to kind of advance their mission. And when I said the G is at play here, so in addition to the social elements of ESG, this also touches governance, specifically the governance systems for police departments to reach their full potential. So the S and G kind of at the same time here, Jeff.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this, the work you're doing is right at the core of a lot of the debate that's going on. Especially last year with the discussion of, and again, I don't leaving the whatever surrounds the issue on the table and talking about exactly what getting at the core of what people were actually talking about. Don't think about the labels, right? The idea was, do community police departments have to be the way that we police right now? Should it be more of a community approach, and should you have, like you said, the community oriented policing where you have social services groups focusing in on dealing with issues that right now the police have to do and have to deal with, and that kind of takes their attention and their resources, so they can't do their primary mission? And how do you create kind of a more of a community based approach to not just law enforcement, but making sure that people get the services that they need? So the fact that your firm is engaged in that and helping communities pay attention to this, that's a really big thing. And that's the kind of thing that changes culture. It changes the way that the country approaches some of its most important interactions between the government and the citizenry, which in large part, day to day, happens at the street level, normally between law enforcement and individual citizens. So that's really something interesting and unexpected when we started talking about this. And the work that you're doing, the fact that you've kind of engaged in this space. I mean, do you know of any other firm within our industry which is doing work like this, or are you kind of standing out there as a unique firm in this space?
I would say we're the market leader in the space in general, and that no other engineering and consulting firm like ours is doing this work. And, I mentioned in the beginning that I'm just really proud to be the leader of such a firm like Jensen Hughes, and this is an example of that.
Well, it's really something, and I do want to kind of tie everything together here because throughout all the questions and answers and talking about different areas, everything from energy storage to community policing, wildfire, mass timber, there are terms that kind of came up on each one. You're doing the modeling, you're doing technology, you're applying technology to all these different challenges. In your view, how important is technology to all the ESG offerings that you offer your clients?
I think it is absolutely critical, not only in the ESG offerings, but for our industry and for those who are listening. Technology is just a powerful lever to transform and reinvent our industry. And that's how we view it at Jensen Hughes. And it just represents a step change in how we're providing value to our clients, our industries, and our markets. We actually have been at technology for over a decade. Today, we have about 10 software technology packages that are available to our clients or available to our team members to use as they do the work. And we just aim to provide value in four specific areas. That's increasing quality of our product, to achieve compliance to standards, to reduce risk, and the biggest one is to drive operational efficiencies for our clients. Right? How do we lean and streamline things? And we have a suite of products. It's called the Advisor Suite, and one of our key products is called Risk Advisor. And the Risk Advisor is for nuclear power, and that's why I'm mentioning it here, because it fits into the ESG conversation, and it's designed for to add value on that risk informed and fire protection engineering, which ultimately meets the decarbonization goals. And a fact is that 70% of the US nuclear units have at least one Jensen Hughes software
Hmm,
product in use today.
that's something. Wow. I have to ask, because another thing we always look at is how do we, maintain the pipeline of talent coming into the industry. With everything that you talked about, it's so much you could choose, right? But if you had a student out there, or someone who would be interested in being an engineer, but at the same time, they're in college and they're also hearing the siren song from Silicon Valley, to go to an Amazon or a Google or another tech startup, a smaller company. What would you say to them to make them change their minds and to come into the field of the consulting engineer, let's say?
Well, that is a great question. I think I would make sure from an innovation and industry perspective that they knew professional services was more than just professional services. There are products and software technologies that are converging on the space every day. So there's a wide variety of things. And I think we need to make sure that we have uh, engineers coming into our industry that actually value client touch and making a difference and solving problems on the front line for our clients. And some of the other industries, you may not get that client touch, and you may not feel that you're making a difference as much as you would in a space like ours. I have a strong passion for this industry, and I think there's a generational change occurring in this industry as well that provides tremendous growth opportunities for younger professionals to be promoted and rise very quickly. We don't want people to rise too quickly because we want them to have a very well-rounded and strong foundation under them. But it's a great profession, and one that is poised for a lot of
Yeah.
investment as well, as we
Yeah.
know.
Well put. Well, I would love to have you back on to kind of focus in. We talked a lot of different areas here, and I wanted to kind of have this as a nice intro call to talk about the different markets that the firm is engaged in. But love the opportunity to dig in a little deeper, especially on the energy storage, nuclear side of things, maybe some of the wildfire stuff. So I'd love to have you back on the show.
Well, I think I passed then. Thank you for having me. It's been a real honor. And I love the ACEC organization and everything that you all stand for and the difference that we together are making in the industry. So thanks a lot,
Well,
Jeff. I really
I,
appreciate it.
I I do appreciate it, and again, has been Raj Arora. He is the CEO of Jensen Hughes, and this has been Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. We'll see you next time.